commander, and then they let him go after the war. He hadn't got the next level of promotion. He never forgave the Navy after having been in a very arduous war against the Nazis, running guns to Stalin across the Arctic Circle. Not what he'd signed up with His Majesty's forces to do, is to run guns to the communists, but it was his duty, so he did it. Very brave, had a horrible time. They let him go at the end of the war, and then they put up the pensions for people who joined later. He never forgave them for it. But it was the big thing in his life that he'd been in the Navy, so we would call him, partly respectfully and partly affectionately, the commander. And I remember one day I thought, I'm not a great one for breakfast or early mornings. My father was an early morning guy. He would go down and make breakfast in the kitchen for himself. My mum liked to lie in as well. I thought, maybe I should just go down and have breakfast with him. I should have put this in the book. And I'm his firstborn, you know, we don't hang out much, and maybe he'd like it if I just came and said, you know, I came down, morning, he looked up, he said, bloody hell, it'll be family prayers next. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to do that. You don't have to tell me twice.
So did writing about your father and mother change the way you think of them or feel about them?
No, I mean, it didn't, because they've been gone for a long time and I've had a lot of time to inwardly digest all that. But there is another question that came up in my life long after my mother was gone, and as my father was dying. My mother's mother, if you follow me closely here, who lived to be nearly 100, as did my grandfather, realized there was no further purpose in keeping a family secret, which was that my mother had Jewish parentage and had not wanted me to know, and had not wanted anyone else to know either. So just as I'm going through that experience that Yeats says is the crucial one of losing your father, Granny arrives and says to my brother and to myself, I've got something to tell you. And it was a rather vertiginous moment. And so I have had to interrogate things again in retrospect. Why did she never tell me? Was she ever going to? What was her motive for keeping it quiet? I think I can now guess.
And how do you do that?
Well, I think that well, for one thing, she could pass. She didn't, as they say, look Jewish, which now I realize that my grandmother rather did. She and her mother had had a slightly hard time in the millinery business in the 30s, in the 40s. England is not a country that's disfigured by any bad record of anti-Semitism, but there's low-level stuff. You know, people would say things like, oh, they've got lots of time to spend on Sundays, or if a Mr. Rubinstein was made, oh, very fine old Anglo-Saxon name. As the man in the Chariots of Fire says, Harold Abrams, you catch it on the edge of a remark. Nothing horrible, but a little bit of edge there. And I think she was absolutely determined that her children wouldn't suffer from this, and that Christopher Eric Hitchens, the firstborn, would become an English gentleman. So you be the judge of how well that worked out.
Well, I must say, as an American, you do a very good impersonation of an English gentleman.
Well, you do say the sweetest things. Yvonne would have been, actually, she would have been very happy to hear that. She would have felt it had been all worthwhile, because she had to sacrifice a lot to get me to school and things like that. And she would still be asking, as would the commander, this is all very well, but when are you going to get a proper job?
And you describe in the book the journey that you went on having discovered this information.
Yes.
And I was curious, did you go on that journey as a journalist or as a relative?
Well, I went to, if you mean to Poland.
Yes.
Yeah. My mother's ancestors came from what is now Poland, but was when they lived there, Germany. As you all know, there's been a lot of trouble every time that border has moved. It's a very worrying area of Europe, and a lot of terrible things have happened there, and our still buried there. And they'd left in good time, actually. I think they saw it coming. So half of my life has been spent writing about matters arising from the movements of that border. How much it cost to change the name of the city of Breslau to Wrocław. In any case, I mean, anyone who's taken any interest in the life and times and authorship of the 20th century is already invested in that, whether they're Jewish or Polish or German or not. So it wasn't just a roots trip, no. But it was that as well.
Right, yeah. Did the personal nature of the engagement change the way you experienced it?
Well, if you go to Breslau, you'll find that, well, Edith Stein is from there, for example, the Jewish woman who became a nun and was sent to Auschwitz. Max Born is from there, the man to whom Einstein wrote the letter saying God doesn't play dice with the universe. The man who invented Zyklon B poison gas is from there. It's an extraordinary place. It was the setting for the midnight of the century, the Hitler-Stalin Pact. And it was the last city in Germany to surrender after Berlin. They held out so long there was hardly one brick piled on another. And then after the mass murder after the Judeo-side, the Shoah Holocaust, there was then a mass expulsion of Germans from there as well, which conditioned the building of the Berlin Wall. So I almost felt trivial. This is a whole chapter in my book, but I almost felt trivial intruding my own family history into it, but I wanted to know why Mr. Blumenthal, my ancestor, had left that small town, Kempno, when he did. And I wanted to find out what the context was and to see what had happened to those he'd left behind.
So you talk about making this discovery and, of course, becoming an American as well. How do you identify yourself now?
Anglo-American. I mean, I didn't move to the United States till I was about 30, so it would be silly to say I'd left everything behind. I mean, if I just went around saying I was an American, people would think it was incongruous.
There's not much of a twang in the accent.
Not a lot, no. I speak American now. I mean, for example, I say I'm going to the store rather than to the shop. And if I'm at the shop, I say, do you have, not have you got. And I avoid the word schedule altogether. Because I can never remember now which one it is. And stuff like that. And I don't like hyphenation. I think Americans should identify as Americans, but the fact is there are people who say they're Polish American, Greek American, Arab American, and so on. Oddly enough, the Jews do it the other way around. It's the American Jewish Committee. Or the American Jewish Congress, not the Jewish American one. I've never quite been able to work out what that is. But Anglo-American is a literature. I mean, Henry James was an Anglo-American. W.H. Auden was an Anglo-American. T.S. Eliot was an Anglo-American. It's a subject. It's
not a bad club.
It's a culture. It's not bad. I make my students at NYU, New School, New York, answer this question. W.H. Auden left England and became, if not exactly an American, certainly a New Yorker. And T.S. Eliot left St. Louis and became a high Anglican, an Anglo-Catholic, and someone who was almost tried to be more English than the English. Which culture got the best of this exchange? It's Auden, by the way. So I think one can decently do that without any reservations. And when I had to take my oath, which I did on Thomas Jefferson's birthday, which is also mine, at the Thomas Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., and they said, well, do you forswear allegiance to any foreign princes? And I had a sudden picture of Prince Charles.
He'd gone sometime earlier.
A sort of bat-eared, Islam-fancying, no taste in girls.
Not much pause there.
Resentful, balding, jug-eared, who will, when his mother dies, become, at that instant, head of the Church of England, head of the state, and head of the armed forces. That's what you get if you found a church on the family values of Henry VIII. I could see myself saying, no, I forswear allegiance to any foreign princes. That prince I can, without that prince I can do. Good night, sweet prince.